Welcome to the latest Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign webinar. This is the Baobab tree in South Africa as a symbol of life and positivity, historical link to humans through medicine and food with Finn Rautenbach from South Africa. And we'll get to his presentation in a bit, and it looks like it's going to be a really awesome visual presentation. So let me run through some of the logistics like I always do. We have a core campaign team here. And we have Dorian Janney, who can't be with us this morning because she is on doing another session in another event today, right now. So I'm going to be doing some, she sent me her slides. I'll be doing some of her slides. Peter Nelson of Oregon State University, Dr. Christopher Schumann at NASA Goddard and UMBC, and Peter Falcon from the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So, upcoming webinar, we don't have a lot of specifics info about this because we're still planning this because we want this to be, this August 2020 webinar to be a lead-in to year 3 of the campaign, which begins September 2020. So, but here during this webinar, just a couple things here. We're going to focus on how to quickly find the data in the globe visualization system. We know some people are still having an issue with that. Just, not that there's a problem in the system, it's that, we're trying to show people the easiest way and quickest way to get in there to look at the data so it doesn't take up a lot of time. And it's really simple to do. I actually created a video that we're going to showcase, and the others are too on our campaign, a video to go onto the viz system to look at tree height, and it literally takes 3 minutes to do. Super easy, super fast, so stay tuned for that. A little bit more about working with online tools, highlight the upcoming year 3 ideas, discuss the cross-campaign collaboration. So, and there's a slide that I think I showed last time that, we really want to highlight some of the other campaigns that we're going to be working with, like the European Phenology Campaign and Globe Mission Mosquito and the Surface Temperature campaign, like the Urban Heat Island information. And we're going to come up with a date, and that date will be sent out soon. It's probably going to be around the first week of August. But our team is going through that right now, so stay tuned for more specific information. So we've been really talking to the European Phenology Campaign folks, mostly out of Croatia, and a lot of these, out of the Czech Republic, and a lot of these, what we're doing is really helping us to understand how we can leverage what they're doing and how they can leverage what we're doing. We can all come together as one, awesome campaign collaboration. Little tree fact that I like to show: trees help clean our drinking water. And how? Forested watersheds provide quality drinking water to more than 180 million Americans. Forests absorb rainfall and use that water to refill underground aquifers, cleansing and cooling water along the way. Certain tree species even break down pollutants commonly found in urban soils, groundwater, and runoff, such as metals, pesticides, and solvents. So, as you know, I like to add these little tree facts here and there, but there's so many things that trees help us with, and that's what we really focus on with this campaign. Not just the science of the trees, but the cultural aspect, the social impact of trees. Of course, the science. But there's lots of things that trees really help our planet as, basically as a regulator of climate change. As you know, we like to showcase, a type of video that talks about the research in trees and tree canopies and carbon and all things trees. So I wanted to showcase this one. It's a short video. It's about 3 minutes. It's called the Africa Synthetic Aperture Radar, called AfriSAR. And it's a program that was done in Africa, a campaign done in Africa about studying the carbon in the trees. And let me go ahead and start this for you. This is a really cool video and a cool project. And I have a couple colleagues who have worked on this, so that's why it came to mind when I thought, what video can we show? This is really cool.
It's clicking, right? You hear it kind of chirping? Like a bird? Oh yeah, got it. So we're about to go do an airborne campaign called AfriSAR, and the goal of our campaign is to go and measure ecosystem structure, specifically forest structure, forest height, forest carbon storage. We're really excited to be going to Gabon because, as it turns out, Gabon is the second most forested country in the world, and they have some really dense tropical forests that has not really been studied extensively, especially from a remote sensing perspective. So remote sensing is what we do when we use satellite or airborne instruments to explore our planet. And so what's really exciting in Gabon is that they've been setting up all of these field plots where they have very intensive measurements of forest structure, of the species composition of a forest, of the age of the forest, of how it's growing. And so now we can compare our airborne measurements with the measurements that they've been collecting in the field.
My name is Sasan Sachi, and my role would be to collect some data on the ground to validate and verify what we observe with our instruments on the aircraft. This is one of our plots. It's 1 hectare. It goes 100 meters this way and 100 meters that way. So in 1 hectare of the land in the rainforest, you can find more than 400 to 500 different species packed. So it's extremely interesting, and it's hot and it's humid, and it's all the water is available, sunshine is available. So it's one of those places in the world that life actually constantly regenerates in different forms. So it's very much interesting to go, and especially since it connects so much to our climate and to the whole Earth system, and has one of the largest impacts on the Earth system, both in terms of its carbon, regulating weather and water. So it's important for us to be there.
One of the questions that we're really interested in at NASA is we really want to be able to balance the global carbon budget. So we know how much carbon is stored in the oceans, we know how much carbon is stored in the atmosphere, and we know how much is emitted through fossil fuel burning, for example, into the atmosphere. But we don't have a good idea of how much carbon is actually emitted into the atmosphere from forest fires. And land use change. And we also don't really have a good estimate of how much carbon is being taken up from the atmosphere and where it is stored, because most of that carbon gets stored by forests. So what we're doing now by our AfriSAR campaign in Gabon is going to an ecosystem that is representative of a larger ecosystem in the Congo Basin or tropical forests in general. And we're getting some really, really high resolution, very accurate measurements of carbon.
As you can see, that video, showcased a really important concept at NASA and beyond of looking at the carbon from the trees. When we have the campaign, we focus on tree height, we focus on land cover and the greenings, but we also have that component of carbon. And there's a protocol for the GLOBE program for carbon, the carbon cycle. And there's different ways to take observations and measurements in the carbon cycle. So this is such a vital observation to take. So I just wanted to show you this because it's showing you, yeah, we have satellites in space measuring the carbon across our planet. This was showcasing an airborne campaign in Africa, in Gabon, doing this same thing. And then on the ground, when we take tree height observations, we're doing several things. We're getting the height of the tree, which can help us understand how much carbon can be, pulled in and then pulled in from these trees and potentially stored. But then also, when you're taking the circumference of this tree using a tape measure with, with either the GLOBE protocol or the NASA GLOBE Observer trees tool, you can also help understand the carbon intake of that tree. And so from space, we're looking at it globally. From the airborne campaign, we're looking at it, these regional forests, whether the rainforests or, arid jungles, all over the world. But then we have the students and the educators and the citizen scientists taking tree height observations, from the ground. And I see that there was a question from, I think it was Lorene, talking about, how to get the students involved who are taking the tree height observations. Now, there's several ways you can do it. We'd be happy to, as a campaign, to work with your students to, let's figure out how they can, possibly come together to, come up with some type of research question or questions, you know, using the data that they're taking, using either the trees tool or using handheld clinometer. I'm not sure which one, or both maybe. But then also, you know, maybe have them, you know, get together and at some point present their findings to this campaign. That'd be great. That's one really cool thing we want to focus on for year 3, is to really get the student involvement, you know, beyond taking the observations. And we, you know, we talk about that all the time, about taking data to the next level. Okay, and this is what we talked about in the SMAP campaign and the ENSO campaign and now in the trees campaign. We want the students to be able to take the observations and then figure out what type of questions they can answer, research questions they can answer with their data, but then how do they share that data with the rest of the world so that it has a real world application. And you know, feel free to reach out to me, Laureen. You know how to get a hold of me. I'm pretty sure that was Laureen. Yeah, we'll go from there, because we have lots of folks on the team and lots of folks, you know, on the campaign who might be interested. Because what we also want to do is to have students from all over the world, you know, coming together. You know, maybe your students working with other students from other countries who are taking observations as well. So I think this is great. Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So a couple campaign. Student research campaign metrics. I'm just going to go to the bottom here. The full campaign, since we started September 15th, we were over 18,000 tree height measurements from 9,303 global sites. We have over 13,000, almost 14,000 land cover measurements. There's been a huge uptick in those measurements over the last couple of months through some of the awesome work that Peter Nelson has been doing, and he may want to mention this, you know, later on when he gives, you know, some is the technology part of the webinar presentation. He's been working with a lot of folks with something called the SEAS program. So there's been a lot of land cover measurements coming in, and that's awesome. And green up, green down, we're closing in on 11,000 during the period of the campaign. So this is all data that students and educators can use for research projects. So there's a lot of information. And on the side, you see here just a couple specific campaign things. We've had 22 webinars so far for the campaign since it started. Today is the 23rd. We have participants from 48 countries who are very active in the campaign. You know, a bunch of blogs with lots of views, and we have a lot of uploaded documents to that. So make sure you go to this URL that's on the top of this slide and check it out, because you can find all this information on there. The numbers you can't find here, I get those through the Globe Advanced Data, the ADAT system, Advanced Data Access Tool. So that's how I get all that information. So for June of 2020, we had over 1,200 tree height measurements, over 2,200 land cover measurements, and 124 greening measurements. So lots of data coming in from all over the world, as you can see. And this is taken from the Globe Visualization System map. And once again, please stay safe, stay healthy. Your health during a pandemic is priority number 1. So, and once again, you can always look at Globe's response to the COVID-19 pandemic at this URL below, but we want you to stay safe and healthy. That's the primary goal with this. Now, let me pass it over to Dr. Christopher Schumann, and he's going to highlight some things in his famous section, Trees in the News. So I will pass it over to Christopher.
Thanks, Brian. In part because we can't travel, we have been looking for stories from around the world. The last time we did a webinar, it was in the Mediterranean. This time it's some charismatic trees out in the southwest of the United States that are unfortunately suffering as climate is changing. I stumbled across a NBC LX online news story about the Joshua trees in California that are dying, in part because the higher temperatures are making it very challenging for them to survive as well as reproduce. Part of that's also in precipitation patterns, which are changing. But folks in that area that are knowledgeable about these trees have essentially asked California to put them into their endangered species program. The federal government, if you watch the video, you'll find out, has decided they're not worth endangered species protections. And it's really kind of a shame because they are a very unusual tree named by the settlers who arrived in that area, and basically just makes this place a very special national park that many people have gone to. I'm not sure it's open at the moment, but we'll be able to go there virtually at that web address in the third bullet. The yucca, my Latin's not so good, but revifolia, a type of agave. Fortunately, the park has enough extent that the northern end is a little higher and a little cooler, so it's a refuge for the trees. And this tree has had a long history with the indigenous peoples of the area, and certainly made very useful things for them over the many centuries they've been in the area. I'm not sure I can pronounce the name that they use, but we'll give it a shot here. Umwishawa. At any rate, the Joshua tree name is, shall we say, perhaps one of those cultural appropriations that we are discussing in the United States these days. So just keep that in mind if you're ever looking for more info on that. It is a really unusual looking tree, and it is really a tough environment to grow in. We'll see some more very dry country here when we go to South Africa and look at the baobabs, a very different kind of unusual tree, and the tallest Joshua tree in the park is only about 40 feet high. If you go forward, those of us who grew up with Dr. Seuss, as we go forward to the next slide, you'll see what they mean by that. They're very different in appearance from one tree to another, and it's sad to note that there appears to be a dead one just at the lower left part of the frame here, but clearly not your typical tree. And so at the web link down at the bottom, you can virtually experience Joshua Tree National Park. I frequently use Google Earth to explore some of these areas, and it looks so much drier than where I am in Greenbelt, Maryland, on the east coast of the US right now. We've been getting a lot of storms of late. So I kind of wish I could get to somewhere drier, but we'll have to settle for the virtual experience. So if you have any questions on that video or visiting the park or those trees, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll try to answer them. But just to give you a little preview, we were lucky enough to find multiple views. You can go to the next slide, Brian, of the biggest baobab in South Africa, or at least as is reported on the internet. The sequence of imagery here is from Google Earth Pro, and one of the things which I think is pretty amazing is not just how big the tree is as it stands out above the surrounding shorter trees and shrubs, but also the importance of that fence line that separates what appears to be a much more heavily grazed area from the protected area around the tree. And so for 1,200 years, that tree has been managing to grow tall and incredibly convoluted in its form. Thank you, Brian. And it must have been able to survive all sorts of typical environmental impacts, but surely that fence is doing it some good right now. We're focusing on this one because Dorian usually does a section called champion trees, but I was just fascinated with the indigenous name for it, the tree that roars. And when you get to see some of these trees up close, it's just astonishing, their structure. Now we're going to be looking into phenology, that is the variation of the canopy through the seasons. We can't quite do that with these images in Google Earth Pro, but if we go forward one slide, you can see a much drier time period in 2017. Clearly, the leaves are off essentially everything almost, or they've completely dried out. It's a little harder to see the difference between the grazed and ungrazed areas along the fence line. And it's just a striking illustration of the tangled branches of the tree that roars, is pretty clearly illustrated in this high resolution satellite imagery. We go ahead one more. We're greening up, as Brian was discussing earlier, focusing on the measurements as the seasons change. The dates are all in the upper left corner. And then just one more view with a different satellite sensor where it's really green. So definite differences in probably rainfall as well between the different years that are in that short series of slides. But just think of that tree for 1,200 years managing to grow ever bigger, depending on whatever the climate was through those centuries. I think it's a truly amazing illustration of tenacity and the strength that many people take from this tree that Finn will detail much more thoroughly for us here in a bit. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Brian.
Thank you, Christopher, so much. Does anybody have any questions related to what was just shown? Because this will lead us directly into the slides that Dorian sent me.
Okay.
All right. So, champion trees, all right. Segole Baobab, located in Vendeland, South Africa. And I popped in here the latitude and longitude if you want to check it out on Google Maps, like some of the imagery that Christopher just was showing. It'll show you here that it is right on the border with Zimbabwe. You can see that just Zimbabwe just to the north of the red arrow. So I actually have a friend who lives in Pretoria, and I was talking to him. He said, I actually visited this a bunch of times. And it's funny because this friend of mine, he was actually the one of the head purser on a cruise ship to Alaska one time on a Holland America tour. When I went, we sailed from Seattle, Washington to Alaska, and I got talking to him. And he's from Pretoria, and I emailed him recently and said about this tree, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've been there, I've seen it." So it's just very cool. It's a small world for sure. It's a big world, but it's a small world, if you know what I mean. So very, very cool. So a couple facts, and some of these facts Christopher talked about. You can see here, the diameter of the trunk of the tree is 10.47 meters, and you can see it's a very irregular trunk. So, but very, very, just amazing looking, just, with this 1,200-year-old tree, just look at how this has grown. It's approximately 22 meters tall. The diameter of its crown is 38.2 meters. You can see how that crown on the top just spreads out. Absolutely amazing. And then, as was mentioned, it's believed to be over 1,200 years old. It's the largest baobab tree in South Africa. It's a succulent, meaning it absorbs water and during the rainy season, and stores it in its trunk, this massive trunk, for the dry season. So it has that ability to store this water for later use, because you know the rainy season is only a short amount of time. And then I'm not sure. I think this might be the same link that Dorian, the same link here that Dorian sent me might be the same that was on the one of Christopher's slides. So, but this is a little bit more about this. As you can see, this is a really famous tree in the world. So go check it out. And we'll have this link. We'll include this link on the website, on the Globe, the campaign website under the webinar, as we always do. As you know, we post the recording, and then underneath we have links that we discussed or were part of the chat. So we'll have all those links in there that you can go and, you know, refer back. If you're watching the recording and we mention a link, you can go directly to that link from that website. So yeah, so please check it out. All right. So before I begin, does anyone have any questions? If you need to, you can unmute, but I'm going to, in a second, turn it over to Peter Falcon so he can introduce our speaker a little bit more, and because he was been back and forth with Finn for a while. So does anybody have any questions? If you need to, you can unmute your microphone. I heard wind, but doesn't count. Not a question. All right, well, let me...
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm Bushra Nisnaqvi from Pakistan. And like my question is, this is a wonderful, you know, research students-led program. This will be student-led program, right?
Yes, this is a student research campaign.
Right.
So yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So the, whosoever is participating from around the world, globe, so they'll be researching on this Baobab tree, or they can work on in their context, in their indigenous trees, they can share in this way.
Yes.
Or do they have to stick to this specific tree?
No, absolutely not. This is just the Baobab tree that we're showing today is just the focus of today's webinar. So it's just one example of, you know, a tree that they can look at. So what we try to do is we try to focus on trees around the world. Since this is called Trees Around the Globe, Student Research Campaign. Yeah, this is just for this focus. But what we want students and educators to do is to definitely, you know, focus their observations and measurements in their local area. If there's really, you know, if there's trees that are really important in their area and there's lots of trees in their area, take observations of those trees, learn more about them and what those trees mean scientifically, culturally in their area. And what we want is we want them to really take the observations, understand what their observations mean, meaning what do the tree heights mean, what does the land cover look like, where their trees located, you know, how are their trees blooming, you know, in the spring, and how are they, you know, potentially, you know, losing their leaves, you know, in the fall and winter. But then also we want them to be able to share that information with other Globe students around the world, because as you know, we don't have, in the United States here, we don't have the Baobab tree, okay? So we can't really study those trees other than what we get from other students and other educators and scientists. So we want people to share, we want the students to share, you know, through research, through presentations, what they're doing and what they're seeing and observing in their local area. So we can get this bigger picture, this broader picture of, you know, how trees affect certain areas.
Right. Thank you so much.
Any type of tree is possible.
Yeah, because in Pakistan, because it's a poor country, it's a developing country. So like still people 30 to 35% they stick on, you know, these herbal medicines, and specifically they grow such trees and plants and herbs, etc. So like my students, they can share those, you know, trees as well. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. And that's something you'll probably learn today, you know, a little bit about, you know, why the Baobab tree is so important. As you can see, we have it set up as, you know, a symbol for life and positivity, a historical link to humans through medicine and food. Yeah, the Baobab tree is super important to science, but it also plays another vital role, you know, with humans, medicine, food, you know, agriculture, all these things.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. It's great. And thank you for being here from Pakistan. All right, let me pass it over to Peter Falcon. Unless there are any other questions, I don't see. So Peter, go ahead, and then after you introduce Finn, I will stop sharing, and then we will go to Finn's his live video.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Brian. So I'd like to first say our guest speaker for today's webinar is coming to us from South Africa. We'd like to thank our Globe partner, Mark Britley, the country coordinator to South Africa, for introducing us to Mr. Finn Rautenbach. So thank you, Mark. I know he's on the line right now. And they have a collaboration as well, Finn and South Africa Globe. Finn is a botanist who's passionate about harnessing the rich botanical wealth of South Africa for the conservation of its rich flora, its diversity, and cultural heritage. Finn formerly was the curator of the Garden Route Botanical Garden, which is nestled in the Rautenbach Mountains. And I apologize if I mispronounced that. I probably did, based on your smile there, Finn. It's in George, South Africa. The garden is 47 acres and focuses on conserving and displaying plants indigenous to the Southern Cape region. And interesting for our group is they have an ongoing tree identification project that has so far ID'd 118 indigenous trees to the garden. The garden is also a sanctuary to indigenous flora and animals from the Southern Cape region. And currently, Finn is the head horticultural, let's see here quickly, my notes. Yeah, horticulturalist in a company called phytopharmaceutical company called AfriSAR Botanicals, where they specialize in botanical resources which can be used as treatments for major ailments like the common cold and flu. So with that, I'd like to thank Finn in advance for his presentation on the Baobab tree and turn it over to you. So Finn, it is all yours. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. I'm just going to give a little bit more of an introduction. Thank you so much for everyone coming out. At the moment, I am in the Drakensberg in South Africa. We're about 2,500 meters above sea level, and I can tell you it is incredibly cold right now. As you can see, I'm wearing a jersey. So, formally trained, I am a botanist from NMU, which is Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. For 3 years, I was the curator of the Garden Route Botanical Garden. As was explained now, the garden works in really I'm conserving the indigenous flora of the region. And as of the beginning of this year, I have been a private botanical consultant. And I'm specializing in indigenous medicinal plants. One of my roles is the head horticulturist at AfriSAR Botanicals. So my passion through my botanical career has been connecting every human being with their natural environment. As a plant nerd like me, it's really, really easy to understand the intrinsic value of these ecosystems that are all around us. For example, in South Africa, a patch of fynbos or some indigenous forest. I can see the value of it just because that is my passion. But for somebody that is, for example, living in a city that is disconnected with these environments or is living below the breadline, it is really, really difficult to understand why these species need to be protected. So this is why I've really focused my passion on the link between humans and our natural environment through cultural heritage and the use of these plants as medicines and foods. So just to give a bit of background about South Africa, it is arguably the birthplace of humankind and of cognitive thinking in human beings. So in the Magaliesberg, there was a hominoid skull found that is 2.5 million years old. And in Mossel Bay, which is close to where I was in the Southern Cape, they found evidence in a cave of the first evidence of human beings catching shellfish and using heat treatment on their rock implements. So it doesn't really matter if this is the birthplace of cognitive thinking or not. But what we do know is that human beings have been living here in South Africa for a very, very long time. And except for a small period of maybe 100 to 150 years, these human beings have been living in absolute symbiosis with their natural environment, using the plants as food and medicine. So what we, in this contemporary environment that we live in now, it is very easy to feel disconnected from our indigenous flora and not understand its intrinsic value. But what we must learn to realize that this is the time that we need to be learning more and more and focusing more and more on these species. In South Africa, there is one commercial doctor to every 17,000 people. And this is putting a huge amount of pressure on our indigenous medicinal plants, because a lot of people are obviously looking towards, just like in Pakistan, looking towards these indigenous plant species as medicines. So we sit in an incredibly interesting time when we have this huge increase in humans, not a fantastic healthcare, and we have an unpredictable climate. So in my opinion, this is really a time to marry our contemporary knowledge of science with a cultural knowledge of indigenous flora to create resilient crops that, that we can use into the future. So things like the baobab and plants like pelargonium that I focus on, and scaletium, these plants are acclimatized to the area. So with changing climates, it's easy for them, a lot easier for them to withstand these longer droughts and these type of environmental factors. So this is why over the last year, I've really decided, along with some business partners, to focus on these indigenous species and writing up proposals on how we can create cultivation protocols for these species and increase awareness for them. One of the myriad of species we've been looking at is the baobab. So for as long as I've been passionate about plants, the baobab has been something that has really, really intrigued me. Living in the Southern Cape of South Africa, which is not really the location of where you can find baobabs in nature, the only place I could see the baobabs was in Rautenbach Botanical Gardens, where I would visit very often. And I would spend hours sitting underneath the branches, pondering the fantastic and incredible cultural heritage of this species. So us botanists call the baobab Adansonia digitata. Adansonia is the genus name, and that is named after a man called Michael Adanson. He was a French surgeon and naturalist. Among many of his fantastic achievements, he was the first to write scientific papers about the baobab. And digitata is the Latin name for hand-like. And I actually have a baobab right next to me here, so I can show you why they call it hand-like. I'm not sure if everyone, sorry, this might be a little bit awkward. Here's the leaf pattern of the plant. And you can see it looks, if you have a real imagination, it looks kind of hand-like. So this is the magic of Latin names, is they really explain plants very well. But yeah, the baobab, as mentioned previously, is unique in a huge amount of ways. With a girth of up to 28 meters and a height of 25 meters, this plant species is regarded the largest succulent in the world. And also, as mentioned previously, predates humankind and the splitting of the continents, with the first dated baobabs estimated at about 200 million years ago. Due to its unusual proportions and its branching system that you guys saw earlier on, that looks almost like a roots, it's often been named the upside down tree. So these unusual proportions have created a lot of interesting African folklore. One of my favorite is this. So once God created the earth, and he had almost finished with his creation, and the last thing he had to do was create the trees. So all the animals came to him and said, please, can we help you with this? And reluctantly he said, okay, sure. So he gave one seed at a time to every animal, and the last seed was the baobab, and the last animal was the hyena. So after everything had grown out, he brought all the animals together and he said, now you guys can all see how stupid the hyena is. He planted the tree upside down. So this is funny in South Africa because culturally everybody seems to think that the hyenas are quite stupid animals. Anyhow, there's also a lot of really, really interesting uses, traditional uses for this species. For example, the seeds have been eaten and said to help deter crocodile attacks. And also a decoction of the bark is made, and young boys are bathed in this, and it's said to ensure that they become vital, strong men. Now that's interesting. And there is a lot of more stories like this that come out of African tradition. But what we can really see out of this, if we read between the lines, we can see that this species has really been imbued into African culture throughout history. So now we're going to go back to more scientific information about the baobab. As this plant is a succulent, its girthy stem, that really wide girth, I mean, we saw it was up to 10 meters wide, and that can store a huge amount of water, which allows it to survive throughout these incredibly dry periods that we have up here in its natural environment. And this is not only important for the survival of the species, as mentioned previously, but also for the myriad of animals, insects, and humans that live around it, that use this plant as medicine, as food, as shelter, and as a source of water. So just to briefly speak to you guys about shelter, is once these plants grow a little bit older, the bottom part of the plant actually starts to hollow out. And it's been used by a lot of animals and as for humans as a shelter. Some people have actually even gone as far as making bars in the bottom of these baobabs. And the biggest one is found in Zimbabwe, which is just directly above South Africa, and it can fit 40 people in it, which is quite amazing. So virtually every part of this plant is useful to human beings. So as I mentioned previously, the baobab is found in an incredibly dry climate. And during these dry periods, it's very difficult to find water in the region. So what nomadic human beings and animals have done is they break off pieces of the branch of the baobab and they chew it, and that acts as a source of water. So that's quite amazing. These water storage capabilities of the baobab also allow it to flower during the harshest time of the year. This gives food and sustenance to a great diversity of different pollinators that wouldn't really be able to find that in this environment if it wasn't for the baobab. So after flowering time in summer, the flowers fall and give rise to an egg-shaped fruit. If you break open the hard shell of this egg-shaped fruit, you'll find a white powder inside that covers the seeds. And that white powder, if you put it in some water and mix it up, it creates a refreshing drink that's been used traditionally. And this drink is not only something that's refreshing, but because of its high ascorbic acid content, it has been used to treat fevers throughout many years. So once you've finished with this powder and you go further and you look at the seeds, these seeds are fantastic and really delicious actually. They taste similar to almonds. and they have high contents of vitamin A, vitamin E, fatty acids, potassium, and calcium. They're delicious to be eaten just as nuts, or are roasted as a coffee substitute, which is really interesting. Pharmaceutical and cosmetic companies internationally have started looking at these seeds, and they've become quite attractive because of their high vitamin content. And they're actually now used in the cosmetic industry. To what they do is they press the entire fruit to extract the vitamins from the seed. I've actually where I'm presenting to you from in the Drakensberg is a farm that actually presses baobab oil called Bright Mountain Oils. And I have some oil right over here. So this is the baobab oil that comes out of the nuts. Quite amazing. There you can see that. So we produce organic baobab oil over here, and I can attest to how amazing its effects are on your skin. It has been shown to be able to help with acne and eczema. So once you finish with all of these, and all you got left is the husk of the fruit. Traditionally, people have now used that husk and burnt it as a fly repellent. But what we do here on the farm is we throw it together with our marula nuts and our rosehip, and we create a really, really awesome compost. So there you can see a compost that we've made out of baobab husk. And that's what we use to grow the vegetables that support all of the people that live here on the farm, 26 people. So as you can see, this is an incredibly, incredibly giving tree. And even the leaves of this plant are actually useful to humans. Traditionally, they've been used as a spinach, or they've been dried and stored for times of need. And these are not only just sustenance, but they have really, really high vitamin C content, which is recorded to be 5 times or 6 times more than oranges, and really high calcium content, which is supposed to be double the amount of milk, which is really interesting. On the farm that we are on, I'm on at the moment, once we've pressed the oil, as I said, we put it into the compost, and we put the husk into the compost. And very often a couple of the seeds slip through into our byproducts, which means in summer we have thousands of baobab plants coming up on our compost heap. So unfortunately, where I'm from at the moment, we have incredibly harsh winters. As you can see, I'm in my fluffy jacket, and we get a lot of frost. I'm down to minus 15 degrees Celsius. So we try to save a lot of the baobabs, pot them up and put them in our greenhouse. But unfortunately, there are thousands, and we really can't save all of them. But we did some research, and we found out that you can take the baobab seedlings, which look like this. Here's a baobab seedling. And you can slice them up into little slices like this. You can see here's the slice, and eat them. And they are really, really delicious. They are sweet and tasty. Excuse my chewing. But yeah, I really hope that this talk has helped bring all of us a little bit closer to the magic of this species. And bear in mind that in South Africa alone, there are 5,000 recorded species with medicinal properties. And each and every one of those species has a story similar to this. That's amazing. That's really, that shows how special conserving our environments are, not only for, as we said, carbon sequestration and the myriad of other reasons, but also for the potential future medicines that will be able to cure the cancers and COVID-19s and all of these type of diseases of the future. So in closing, I'm going to leave you with this really lovely saying that I came across. wisdom is like a baobab. No one individual can embrace it. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Finn. That was amazing. So let me, I'm going to pass it over to Peter Falcon because he has, there's a bunch of questions that he has noticed in the chat and things and through contact. So I will pass it over to Peter, and there's a bunch of questions for you, Finn.
Great.
Thanks, Brian. So Finn, one of the questions is, what sparked your interest in botany and in working with the baobab trees?
So I was lucky enough to grow up in the Garden Route on the border of the largest evergreen forest in South Africa. And my parents were also absolutely passionate environmentalists. So we grew 80% of our food throughout my entire life growing up. So, and also the medicines that we used were all either homeopathic medicines or medicines that my mom grew in the garden. So this is really what sparked my passion for botany and specifically ethnobotany. And as I moved on in my career, finished my degree in botany and started working at the botanical gardens, I really started trying to figure out how we can connect every human being to the environment in which we live. And this is when I realized that human beings really start to see the importance of things once we realize how we can live in symbiosis with it and how it can benefit us, frankly said. So that's really what that's where my focus really became very focused into indigenous medicinal plants. So baobab is only one of the medicinal plants that I work with. I also work with a plant called Pelargonium sedoides, which is an antiviral plant. It's a real miracle plant. Scaletium tortuosum, which is an antidepressant that I'm busy creating cultivation protocols for. And we have a couple other plants too, which are really, really interesting.
Thanks. Another question is, how long does it take a baobab to reach maturity, and how big can they get?
So a baobab, as you can see, I mean, they grow hundreds and hundreds of years. And to reach maturity, I would say a good few hundred years, because the baobab that is in Kirstenbosch, for example, is nowhere close to a real mature baobab, and that baobab is about 150 years old.
Wow.
So yeah, they're really, really slow growing plants. As we said earlier on, they're in arid regions. So a succulent plant takes a long time to grow.
And one last question is, how much water does a tree like this need to survive? And are they considered to be endangered in the region?
Yes, they are considered to be endangered. And as we said, it's a succulent plant, which means that it's whenever there's water around, it will absorb as much as it can and keep it in that wide, girthy stem. As you can see, even when they're little, they have these fat stems, which is quite amazing. This plant is only a few months old before it got hit by the frost. So it doesn't need that much water. All it needs is an area that doesn't get frost. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay,
All right, Brian, I will
fantastic.
turn it back over to you.
All right. I have just one question. Finn, you showed that vial of oil. About how many nuts would it take to create a vial of that size that you showed?
A lot. I'm sorry. I don't know exactly how many, but a whole lot. We go through tons and tons and tons of the nuts.
Literal tons. Yes.
Literally tons, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Truckfuls.
Yeah. All right. And any further questions before we pass it over to our final part of the webinar with Peter Nelson, showing some online tools and some things that you know are great relevance to what we've been talking about today. All right. For the sake of time, let's pass it over to Peter Nelson. Peter.
thanks for that, Brian, and thanks so much for a great presentation. Hold on, let me put my microphone so I can actually hear you, and you can hear me. Thanks for that great presentation, Finn. I really appreciate the insight that you both bring as a botanist, but also as a human who appreciates the world around them. And so I really appreciate that presentation and bringing us not only the science perspective, but also the human perspective of a tree I've never seen before. And so you know, this is one of those pieces that as we start thinking about all these different trees that other people get to experience, as scientists, we want to kind of be thinking about how we organize our information and the way that we can also learn a little bit more about the species that populate the earth. And so I wanted to highlight this week a great place that is actually helping to organize and to archive data related to species locations. And this is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And this actually is a place that actually collects a lot of species level information. Sometimes they're coming from people exactly like Finn, who are going out and collecting samples of species, where they're located, and they're documenting them. And so this has been going on for 300, 400 years now, as people have been moving across the world. And so we needed a way to actually organize that. So databases. So this GBIF website that you can go to, you can actually go in and look up information about a particular tree in your area. And so here I'm showing the Latin name for our baobab tree. And importantly, we have a map that actually shows us some locations where people have identified and located individual baobab trees that are out there. And what we can do with this actually is use some of the tools that NASA has helped to create, as well as use in the type of science we do, which is remote sensing, but connected to the ground. And so in a lot of cases, we need to know where to start looking. And so this might be a really interesting way for any teachers out there or students who want to know, what is the distribution of the baobab tree? How you know, where can I find one of these if I'm actually looking for one? So this might be one place where you can start looking and identifying where people have reported this. And so this is one of these, why we're doing the activities that we're doing. And the GLOBE program also has a similar type of database. May not have as many species, may not have some of these sort of things with it. But I wanted to highlight this because ultimately, as scientists, we want to share our information with other people. And so if I'm out anywhere and I happen to find a baobab tree, recording that location using Globe Observer, for instance, is a great way for me to be able to share my information with a professional like Finn, so that he might be able to have more resources or have some other areas that he might want to then go research. So this is another type of science research that we do. And the great thing that we can start doing with, once we have these locations, I went and put together a project in this tool that I've highlighted a couple times. It's called Collect Earth Online. And this allows us to actually use the very high resolution satellite imagery, like what Christopher showed earlier, looking at the Joshua trees, and we can do a little interpretation. We can actually look at some of these baobab trees that are out there. So if you go here, you don't actually have to log in or register. It's useful though. And you can just search for the GLOBE program. And there's this option here for the GLOBE program. And then I actually uploaded 1,500 site locations where there are potentially a baobab tree. And I pulled those straight out of that database. So I don't know what's actually there. And this is actually a really good way to do a check on locations of data, right? Is that tree actually still there? Did the person who reported a tree at a location report it correctly? Is the latitude, longitude in the right location? Because when we start putting it together with satellite data, if it's not in the right location, we're not talking about the same things. So you can actually go in here, and if you just click on this baobab project, you can actually start to see an interesting distribution. Like there's one in the United States. Now, is that right or not? I don't know, that's kind of perplexing to me. Based off of what Finn was describing, it makes a lot of sense that we have a wide distribution here across Africa. But you can see that we even have one reported way up here in, it looks like northern Germany, Denmark area. So this is just kind of the distribution of where they're located, just as a first place. But then you can go in and you can walk a virtual transect. So the GLOBE program has a land cover protocol, or even the carbon cycle protocol has you walk in these transects that are spaced about 10 meters apart. So that's exactly what I set up here. So what's interesting is in this very first location, I'm not really seeing what looks like a tree necessarily, unless it's this weird kind of blobby thing, right? So Finn, is this kind of something like that you would expect to see for a baobab tree? So it's a tree that's individual, kind of separated from other from other vegetation.
Doesn't quite look like it to me. The branching pattern also doesn't look right, because usually they have that really wide, interesting branching pattern.
Yeah.
But this is an incredible tool.
Exactly. So Finn, please go in and take a look at some of these locations. And I encourage everybody else who watches this to go and explore and help us to see, because this is one of our limitations, right? Our satellite image may not be clear enough in some of these locations for us to identify the tree, or the location where somebody reported that tree may not have enough decimal points. And so when we actually try to map it or go to that location, we may not actually align ourselves. So this is where we can all work together and look through these 1,500 sites that have recorded a baobab tree in it, and see what does it actually look like from above, and are these records usable? Can we actually do understand the distribution of the species, kind of through both the historical records, which I'll take you back to here, the historical records that were recorded, and then what is there now, right? And so when we're doing science, these are the steps that we want to go through and do, even before we do analysis, right? And so I wanted to share this with you because this is a great way that I like to go around and explore the world, to explore historical data sets that other people have created, but also start to understand what different trees look like. And so Finn, I really appreciate you coming and sharing your insight with us. And we hope that people will go and explore some of these incredible trees, and more likely actually find a tree in this 1,500 data record that's out there. Finally, I will highlight, because as you see, you go to another plot, you actually can see the satellite record measurements that were out there. So how green is it around these trees? And this might be something that actually helps us to understand the environment around these trees. So just to kind of help you connect to the NASA science and measurements that are out there, this is a great tool that we're using throughout our program, and so these are some tools that you might be able to bring to your classroom, or that students might be able to take advantage of. So before we go, I will drop these into the chat box so everybody has those links in there. But I wanted to share some of my online tools and some of the data limitations that we have as we start to explore particular species in particular locations.
All right, thank you, Peter. Peter's presentation with the Collect Earth was such a great ending to what we really want to be the focus of this campaign. We touched upon, the science with that, the science of looking at it from space, and how important it is to look at trees in the real world from the ground. But then we also, through Finn's presentation, talked about the cultural, the societal, the medicinal, and the scientific importance of just this one amazing tree, the baobab tree. So this is what this campaign's all about. It's, doing the research from above, from the ground, understanding what the research means, the applications that all these trees around the planet can help us with. So this was, you know, in my mind, a just perfect webinar in the sense that we covered everything that we wanted to focus on, from visual to anecdotal to the scientific to everything. So yeah, everyone who's on here, please take a look at what you know, more about the Baobab tree and all its findings through researchers and horticulturists like Finn, and what Peter talked about, looking at, you know, the satellite imagery and finding, you know, where they are around the planet. And this goes along with other trees as well. And then looking at the you know, the satellite data that Christopher spoke on, and, you know, investigate trees in your area. So if there's nothing else, we are at 11 minutes past the hour. So let me just double check in the chat. We see there's lots of links. Peter put a bunch of links in here. That's great. And we will include all of those under the recording once I get it back from Zoom, and I put it up on the Globe website. And stay tuned for that email to come out probably later today once I get the recording and it gets up there on the website. But I want to thank Finn again for an amazing presentation. And thank you. That's awesome that you actually had the Baobab sapling next to you ready to show. That's awesome. Yeah, that was great. Awesome visuals. But thanks again so much. And hopefully, you know, we'll continue to, you know, have you as part of the campaign. And, you know, let's see what some people do, you know, with some of this research, whether it be looking at it directly, if we get some tree-eyed observations from folks, you know, who are near a Baobab tree, you know, or look at the satellite data of it. So hopefully, you know, let's maintain this this awesome collaboration. So does anybody have any final thoughts? Yep, thank you so much, Finn. Any thoughts from any final thoughts? I'm gonna hit stop recording in about 30 seconds. All right. All I hear is silence, so I will go ahead and stop the recording right now.